She was given away in the middle of a snowstorm, not because her father hated her, but because he was too afraid to save her. Everyone in Deadwood believed she was being taken by a monster. A man with blood on his hands, a name people whispered, never spoke aloud. But no one asked the only question that mattered. What if the man they feared was the only one God sent to protect her? And what if the real danger was the one she called family? The winter wind howled through Deadwood, South Dakota, carrying needles of ice that bit into skin and bone, while snow piled high against wooden storefronts and buried the truth beneath silence. Emily Carter stood by the frost-laced window of the sheriff's house, her breath fogging the glass as she stared out at the white, blinded street. She was 21, tall and slender, with chestnut hair pinned neatly at the back of her head, though loose strands now clung to her pale cheeks from nervous habit. Her skin, once warm with life, had taken on the muted tone of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. There was a softness to her features, gentle eyes, slightly trembling lips, that made her seem fragile. But beneath that softness lived a quiet stubbornness, forged from years of watching her father enforce law in a lawless land. She had always believed in order, in right and wrong. Tonight, those beliefs felt like childish illusions. Behind her, Sheriff William Carter paced the length of the room like a caged animal. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, his once imposing frame now weighed down by exhaustion. His hair, once thick and black, had thinned and turned streaked with gray, and a heavy mustache shadowed a mouth that rarely smiled anymore. His face was angular, weather-beaten, carved by years of dust, gun smoke, and hard decisions. People in town used to say William Carter was a man who couldn't be bent. But tonight, his hands shook, and his eyes avoided his daughter's reflection in the glass. Whatever had happened had already broken him. "You shouldn't stand so close to the window," he muttered, voice rough, as if the cold itself had scraped his throat raw. "People are watching." Emily didn't turn. "They've always watched us," she said quietly. "That's what happens when you wear a badge." William stopped pacing. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick as the snow outside. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that seemed to press the air out of the room. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, not the knock of a neighbor, not the knock of a friend. William's shoulders stiffened. He closed his eyes briefly, as though bracing himself for a blow he knew was coming. "Stay here," he said. Emily turned then, her heart tightening. "Father, stay. Here." There was no room for argument in his tone, but she saw it now. The fear. Real, unmasked fear. He opened the door. The man standing on the threshold seemed to bring the storm in with him. Snow clung to the dark shoulders of his long coat, melting slowly into damp patches, while the wind curled around him like it belonged there. Jack Turner was taller than most men in Deadwood, easily over 6 feet. His build lean, but hardened, like something carved from raw timber rather than flesh. His face was sharply defined, high cheekbones and a square jaw covered in rough stubble that hinted at days without concern for appearance. A faint scar ran along the edge of his jawline, disappearing beneath his collar, just visible enough to suggest a story no one had the courage to ask about. His eyes were the most unsettling part. A cold, pale gray, almost colorless, they held a stillness that didn't belong to any ordinary man. Not anger, not warmth. Just something distant, like he had already stepped beyond the reach of other people. The town called him a killer, said he'd shot men without hesitation, said he'd once ridden out of a burning camp and never looked back. No one knew the truth. No one dared to. "Sheriff," Jack said, his voice low and even, like gravel pressed under boot. No greeting, no courtesy, just acknowledgement. William Carter swallowed. "You came. I said I would." Emily had stepped closer without realizing it, drawn by something she couldn't name. Jack's gaze flicked toward her briefly, not lingering, not examining, just noticing. But that single glance made her chest tighten. There was no hunger in it, no cruelty, and somehow, that was worse. It felt like being looked through. "This is my daughter," William said, his voice strained. "Emily." Jack gave the faintest nod, as if confirming something to himself. "I know who she is." Of course he did. Everyone did. The sheriff's daughter. The one thing William Carter had left untouched by the dirt of his work. Or so Emily had believed. The wind howled louder, rattling the doorframe. William stepped aside reluctantly. "Come in." Jack entered without hesitation, bringing the cold with him. Snow melted onto the wooden floor as he removed his gloves slowly, methodically. He didn't sit, didn't relax. He simply stood there, a presence that filled the room without needing to move. Emily's pulse quickened. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. "What do you want?" she asked before she could stop herself. William flinched. "Emily." Jack raised a hand slightly, silencing him without effort. His eyes settled on her again, steady, unreadable. "Your father owes a debt." The words fell like stones. Emily frowned. "A debt? To you?" William's face went pale. "That's enough." "No," Jack said calmly. "It isn't." Silence again, heavy, suffocating. Then William spoke, his voice breaking in a way Emily had never heard before. "I made a deal." Her stomach dropped. What kind of deal? He couldn't look at her. That was when she knew. Jack answered instead. "Protection," he said. "For him. For the town." A pause. "For you." Emily shook her head slowly, confusion twisting into dread. Protection from what? Neither man answered immediately. Outside, the storm roared louder, as if swallowing the world beyond the walls. Finally, William whispered, "From men who don't knock before they take what they want." Emily's breath caught. Jack stepped forward then, just one step, but it felt like the room shifted with him. "The debt can't be paid in money," he said. "Not anymore." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Then how is it paid?" Jack didn't hesitate. "With a marriage." The world seemed to tilt. Emily stared at him, waiting for something. Mockery. Explanation. Anything that would make the words make sense. But his expression didn't change. "You're joking," she said, though she already knew he wasn't. "No." William finally looked at her, and the guilt in his eyes was worse than any confirmation. "It's the only way," he said hoarsely. "It keeps you safe." "Safe?" Emily's voice cracked, disbelief rising into something sharper. "By handing me over to him?" Jack didn't react to the accusation. He simply watched her, as if measuring something she didn't understand. "You won't be harmed," he said. The certainty in his tone was almost insulting. Emily laughed once, a hollow, broken sound. "That's what men like you always say." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not offense. Something quieter. Something almost like restraint. "Men like me," he repeated softly. Outside, the wind slammed against the house. Inside, Emily realized something that made no sense at all. If Jack Turner truly was the man everyone said he was, then why did it feel like he was the only one in the room who wasn't lying? And why did that terrify her more than anything else? The storm did not break the next morning. It deepened, swallowing Deadwood beneath a relentless white sky as the world narrowed to wind, ice, and the groan of wood under frost. Emily Carter barely remembered the moment she stepped into the wagon. The memory blurred between numb shock and the sharp sting of cold air against her face. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, coating everything in a suffocating silence. Jack Turner drove without speaking, his gloved hand steady on the reins, his posture rigid as if carved from the same frozen landscape around them. The horses, two massive draft animals with shaggy coats and slow, powerful steps, pushed forward through drifts that reached nearly to their knees. Emily sat beside him, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket he had tossed at her without a word, though she noticed he had not taken one for himself. She kept her hands clenched in her lap, fingers stiff with cold and tension. Every instinct told her she was being taken somewhere she would never return from. Her mind spun with half-formed fears, locked doors, harsh commands, a life stripped of choice. Yet the man beside her remained silent, distant, as though she were not even there. Hours passed. The town disappeared behind them, swallowed by hills and rising pine forests. The trail narrowed, winding upward into rough terrain, where the wind howled louder, unchallenged by buildings or fences. Emily's teeth chattered despite the blanket. She tried to hold herself together, to maintain the composure she had clung to all her life, but the cold and fear gnawed at her resolve. At one point, the wagon lurched violently over a buried rock. Emily gasped as her shoulder slammed into the wooden side. Before she could react, Jack's hand shot out, not to grab her, but to steady the wagon. His movements were precise, controlled. Then, without looking at her, he reached behind the seat and pulled out another layer, a thick buffalo hide, and dropped it over her lap. The weight and warmth were immediate, overwhelming. "You'll freeze before we reach the ridge," he said, his voice flat, almost indifferent. Emily blinked, startled by the unexpected concern. "And you won't?" He didn't answer. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. By late afternoon, the light had begun to fade into a dim, gray haze. The storm showed no sign of easing. Just as Emily's strength began to falter, a structure emerged through the swirling snow. A low, sturdy farmhouse set against a slope of dark pines. It wasn't large, but it was solid, built from thick timber logs, the roof steep enough to shed snow. Smoke curled faintly from a chimney, a fragile sign of warmth in an otherwise unforgiving wilderness. Jack brought the wagon to a halt. Before Emily could gather herself, a shape burst from the side of the house. The dog was enormous, easily as tall as Emily's waist when it bounded forward, its thick coat a mix of dark gray and black, streaked with white along the chest. It was an old animal, perhaps 8 or 9 years, but its body remained powerful, muscles visible beneath its fur. Its eyes, a deep amber, locked onto Jack first, and its tail wagged in a slow, heavy rhythm that suggested loyalty more than playfulness. "Easy, Ranger," Jack muttered, his tone softer than Emily had heard before. The dog, Ranger, circled the wagon once, then sat, watching Emily with cautious curiosity. Not hostile, not welcoming, just assessing. Jack climbed down and secured the horses with quick, efficient movements. Then he turned to Emily. For a brief second, she braced herself, expecting to be ordered down. Or worse, pulled. Instead, he simply said, "You can manage?" The question caught her off guard. It wasn't kindness, but it wasn't force either. Yes, she replied, though her legs trembled as she climbed down, her boots sinking into the snow. He didn't offer a hand, but he stayed close enough that if she slipped, he would have caught her. She noticed that too. "Inside," he said, nodding toward the door. Emily stepped forward cautiously, Ranger falling into step beside her, its large presence both intimidating and oddly reassuring. When she pushed the door open, warmth hit her immediately. Dry, steady heat from a stone hearth, where embers glowed beneath freshly placed logs. The interior was simple, but unexpectedly orderly. A wooden table stood near the center, 2 chairs pushed neatly in place. Shelves lined one wall, filled with preserved food, tools, and carefully folded cloth. A narrow bed rented against the far corner, layered with thick blankets and fur pelts. There was no dust, no clutter, no sign of neglect. Everything had its place. Jack entered behind her, setting down a crate of supplies. Snow melted from his coat onto the floor as he removed it, revealing a worn shirt stretched across his shoulders. Without looking at her, he moved to the hearth, adding more wood, coaxing the fire into a steady burn. Emily stood in the center of the room, unsure what to do, her breath still uneven. This was not what she had expected. "Sit," Jack said, not unkindly, but with a tone that allowed no argument. She obeyed, lowering herself into one of the chairs. Her body ached from the journey, her mind struggling to keep pace with everything that felt wrong. He placed a tin mug in front of her. Steam rose from it. "Drink," he said. "It'll help." Emily hesitated, then lifted it. The liquid was bitter, herbal, but it warmed her from the inside out. She hadn't realized how cold she had become until that moment. Jack turned away again, moving to a cast-iron stove. He worked with quiet efficiency, slicing cured meat, dropping it into a pan. The sizzle filled the room, breaking the silence. "You cook?" she asked before she could stop herself. A pause. Then, "I eat." It was the closest thing to humor she had heard from him, though his tone never changed. He served the food without ceremony, setting a plate before her before taking one for himself. They ate in silence. The meal was simple but hearty, and despite everything, Emily found herself hungry. When he finished, Jack stood, cleaned his plate, and moved to a wooden chest near the bed. He pulled out a thick blanket and tossed it onto a worn armchair near the fire. "The bed's yours," he said. Emily froze. "What?" He gestured briefly. "You'll sleep there." "And you?" He didn't look at her. "Chair's fine." The answer made no sense. She had prepared herself for something else, something darker, something she couldn't name but had feared since the moment the deal was spoken. But this was distance, deliberate, unwavering distance. Emily lay in the bed later, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling as the fire crackled softly. Across the room, Jack sat in the chair, unmoving, eyes closed, but not asleep. Ranger lay at his feet, head resting on his boots, ever watchful. Nothing about this felt real. A man feared by an entire town had taken her into isolation and refused to touch her. As exhaustion finally began to pull her under, a single thought lingered, sharp and impossible to ignore. If Jack Turner had truly wanted a wife, then why did he act like he was protecting a stranger? The third night, the storm returned with a vengeance, wind screaming through the trees like something alive. pressing against the cabin walls, as if it meant to tear them apart and drag everything inside into the dark. Emily Carter sat near the hearth, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, though the tea inside had long gone cold. Sleep had become a stranger to her, each night stretched into hours of listening. Wind, fire, the occasional shift of Jack Turner's weight in the chair. She had begun to memorize those sounds, as if they were clues to a man she still did not understand. The fear that once consumed her had dulled, replaced by something more unsettling: curiosity. Jack stood near the door, pulling on his coat. He moved with the same quiet precision as always, each motion deliberate, efficient, as though wasted energy was a luxury he couldn't afford. His face was unreadable, but there was tension in the line of his jaw tonight, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. "You're going out?" Emily asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Traps," he replied simply. "In this?" She gestured toward the door as the wind rattled it violently. A brief pause. "Storm won't wait for better timing." He reached for the latch. "Jack!" The name felt strange on her tongue. He stopped, just slightly, enough to show he had heard her. "Why do you do this?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could restrain it. "Why bring me here at all?" For a moment, he didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough that she thought he might ignore her entirely. Then, without turning, he said, "Safer than Deadwood." And then he was gone. The door shut behind him with a heavy thud, sealing her inside with the fire, the shadows, and Ranger, who had lifted his head at the sound. The dog watched her for a moment, then settled again, though his ears remained alert. Emily exhaled slowly, frustration and unease twisting together in her chest. Nothing about this made sense. If Jack was truly the man the town believed him to be, he should have taken what he wanted by now. But instead, he kept his distance, spoke only when necessary, and left her alone in a place where no one could hear her scream. Unless that was the point. Her gaze drifted to the far corner of the room, where the wooden floorboards near the bed looked slightly uneven. She had noticed it earlier, a subtle difference that didn't fit the otherwise meticulous order of the cabin. She hesitated. Then she stood. Ranger's head lifted again, watching her with those steady amber eyes, not stopping her, not encouraging her, just observing. "It's nothing," she murmured, more to herself than to the dog. But her feet carried her forward anyway. She knelt beside the loose board, her fingers brushing the edge. It shifted slightly under her touch. Her heart began to pound, a warning she chose to ignore. Slowly, carefully, she pried it up. Beneath it lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Emily froze. Every instinct told her to leave it alone, to step back, to pretend she had seen nothing. But that same restless curiosity, the same need to understand, pushed her forward. She unwrapped it. Inside were papers, not just a few, but a stack, folded, worn, some stained with age, others crisp and official. She picked one up, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded it. A badge fell into her lap. Her breath caught. It was tarnished, the silver dulled with time, but the engraving was still visible. Deputy Sheriff, Black Hills Territory, Jack Turner. Emily stared at it, her mind struggling to reconcile the object in her hands with the man she had come to know. A deputy? That was impossible. The stories about him, every whispered rumor, every fearful glance, painted him as something far removed from the law. Her fingers moved quickly now, flipping through the papers. Reports, signed statements, names she recognized from Deadwood and beyond. And then, a photograph. It was faded, edges worn, but the image was clear enough. A younger Jack stood beside another man, both wearing badges, both looking into the camera with the same hard, unyielding gaze common to men who had seen too much, too soon. The other man was older, heavier, with a thick beard and deep-set eyes that carried a quiet authority. His posture was rigid, his presence commanding even in stillness. There was something familiar about him, though Emily couldn't place it immediately. She turned the photograph over. Sheriff Daniel Hayes, 1876. The name struck her like a physical blow. Daniel Hayes had been the sheriff before her father, a respected man, a man people trusted. "What happened to you?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was asking about Hayes or Jack. Her hands moved again, faster now, searching, and then she found it. A document, official, stamped, bearing the unmistakable seal of the territorial court. Her eyes scanned the words, each line tightening the knot in her chest. Charge, murder. Accused, Jack Turner, Deputy Sheriff. Victim, Daniel Hayes. Emily shook her head instinctively. No, but the evidence didn't stop there. Witness statements, testimonies, all pointing to the same conclusion. Jack Turner had shot his own sheriff, his mentor. Her breath came faster now, panic rising. This was the man she was alone with. This was the man her father had given her to. The door slammed open. Emily jumped, the papers slipping from her hands as cold air rushed into the room. Jack stood in the doorway, snow clinging to his coat, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. His eyes went immediately to the floor, to the open board, to the papers. For the first time since she had met him, something broke through the stillness in his expression. Not anger, not fear. Something heavier. "You shouldn't have opened that," he said quietly. Emily stepped back, her heart pounding. "You were a deputy," she said, her voice shaking. "You were the law." He didn't deny it. "You killed him," she continued, the words tasting bitter. "Sheriff Hayes." Silence. The storm howled outside, louder than ever. Finally, Jack stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He didn't move closer, but the space between them felt charged, fragile. "I didn't kill him," he said. Emily let out a short, disbelieving breath. "That's not what this says." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." His gaze dropped briefly to the badge on the floor, then returned to her. There was no pleading in his eyes, no desperation, just a quiet certainty that made her hesitate. "They needed someone to blame," he continued, "and I was convenient." "Who is they?" Emily demanded. A pause. Then, "The same men your father's afraid of." The words hit harder than anything else. Emily's stomach twisted. "The gang?" Jack nodded once. "They were running things back then. Still are." His jaw tightened slightly. "Hayes found out. Tried to stop them." "And you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was there when it happened," he said. "That was enough." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. "And me?" Emily asked, her voice trembling again. "What does any of that have to do with me?" Jack looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Not distance, not indifference, concern. "They were coming for you," he said. Emily went still. "To collect your father's debt," he continued. And they don't deal in money when money runs out. The implication settled over her like ice. You mean? She couldn't finish the sentence. Jack didn't make her. I married you, he said, his voice steady, because it makes you harder to take. The truth landed in pieces, each one sharper than the last. The rumors, the fear, the distance. It wasn't cruelty. It was protection. Emily's legs felt weak as she sank into the chair behind her, her mind racing to catch up with everything she thought she knew. The man she had feared most was the only one standing between her and something far worse. And suddenly, the cabin didn't feel like a prison anymore. It felt like a shield. The storm broke at dawn, but not into silence, only into a thinner kind of chaos, where the wind no longer screamed, but whispered over snow that hid everything waiting beneath it. Emily Carter had not slept. The truth from the night before sat heavy in her chest, shifting everything she thought she understood about Jack Turner. The cabin no longer felt like a prison, but it was not peace either. It was a waiting place, a fragile line drawn against something closing in. Jack stood near the window, his rifle resting against his shoulder as he scanned the horizon through a narrow gap in the frost-covered glass. His movements were sharper today, less restrained. The quiet distance remained, but something underneath it had changed. Alert, coiled, ready. They'll come, he said. Emily turned toward him. You're certain? They don't leave debts unfinished. The word settled like iron. Ranger, who had been lying near the hearth, rose slowly. The old dog's body stiffened, ears forward, eyes fixed on the door. A low growl vibrated deep in his chest, not loud, but steady, the kind of warning that didn't need to be heard to be understood. Emily felt it then. Not fear, not like before. Something clearer, sharper. What do I do? She asked. Jack looked at her, really looked this time, weighing something unseen. Then he crossed the room and reached for the shotgun mounted on the wall. It was a heavy, double-barreled piece, worn but well kept, the wood darkened by years of use. He held it out to her. Can you hold it steady? He asked. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it, the weight surprising her. I don't know. You will, he said. There was no reassurance in his voice, no softness, just certainty. A sound cut through the air, not the wind. Hooves, distant, but unmistakable. Jack moved instantly, stepping to the side of the window, his body angled to avoid being seen. Emily's breath caught as she followed his gaze. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, their silhouettes dark against the snow. They rode with purpose, not hesitation, cutting through the drifts as though they had followed this path before. They found us, she whispered. Jack didn't respond. He already knew. The first rider pulled ahead of the others, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested confidence rather than caution. As they drew closer, Emily could see his face. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with a thick coat lined in fur and a hat pulled low over his brow. His beard was neatly trimmed, unusual for men this far from town, and his features were sharp, deliberate. Every line of his face suggesting control. His eyes, dark and calculating, scanned the cabin with a slow, deliberate interest. This was not a man who rushed. This was a man who expected to win. That's Cole Mercer, Jack said quietly. Emily swallowed. You know him. I know what he does. Cole Mercer brought his horse to a stop just beyond the yard, his 2 men flanking him. One was younger, thin and restless, his movements twitchy, his gaze darting. The other was older, heavier, with a thick beard and a permanent scowl carved into his face. Both carried rifles, but neither held them up yet. Mercer smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Turner!" he called out, his voice carrying easily through the cold air. Smooth, controlled. "You've been a hard man to find." Jack stepped outside before Emily could react, pulling the door shut behind him. The movement was deliberate, placing himself between her and them. Ranger moved to the door, pressing close, a low growl rumbling again. Emily stood frozen, the shotgun heavy in her hands, her heart pounding so hard it made her vision blur. Outside, the voices continued. "You took something that doesn't belong to you," Mercer said. "She's not yours," Jack replied. Mercer chuckled softly. "Everything belongs to someone, Turner. You know that better than most." A pause. Then, gunfire. The sound exploded through the air, deafening, immediate. Emily flinched, the shotgun slipping slightly in her grip as her instincts screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear. But she didn't move. Another shot. Then another. She could hear Jack's rifle now, sharp, controlled, each shot measured. The chaos outside was sudden, violent, impossible to follow. Then, a cry of pain. Jack. Emily's body reacted before her mind could catch up. She ran to the door, throwing it open despite the cold that rushed in. Jack was on one knee, his rifle still raised, but his left side was dark, blood spreading across his coat. The younger rider lay in the snow, unmoving, while the older one had taken cover behind a fallen log, firing blindly. Mercer stood near his horse, revolver in hand, calm as ever. "End of the road," he said. Jack tried to raise his rifle again, but his movement was slower now, unsteady. Emily didn't think. She stepped forward. The shotgun felt impossibly heavy, her hands shaking as she raised it. Everything Jack had shown her, how to hold it, how to steady her breath, flashed through her mind in fragments. Mercer turned. Their eyes met. For a split second, he hesitated. Not in fear, but in surprise. That was enough. Emily pulled the trigger. The blast shattered the silence, the recoil slamming into her shoulder, nearly knocking her backward. Smoke filled the air, thick and blinding. When it cleared, Mercer was gone from his feet, thrown back into the snow, his body still. The remaining man didn't stay to fight. He scrambled to his horse, panic overtaking whatever loyalty he had, and fled into the trees without looking back. Silence fell again, broken only by Emily's ragged breathing. She lowered the gun slowly, her arms trembling, her ears ringing. Jack was watching her. Not as something fragile, not as something to protect, but as something else entirely. "You hit him," he said, his voice strained but steady. Emily swallowed, her throat tight. "I didn't miss." The words surprised even her. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already moving to his wound, pressing down to stop the bleeding. The fear was still there, but it was different now. It didn't paralyze her. It drove her. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Not to being that girl." Jack didn't argue. For the first time, he didn't try to keep his distance either. And as the snow began to fall again, covering the blood, the bodies, and the past, Emily Carter realized something she could never unlearn. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The road back to Deadwood cut through frozen valleys and blackened pines, where the snow had begun to harden into brittle crust beneath the hooves of two weary horses moving steadily toward a reckoning neither rider could avoid. Emily Carter rode upright, despite the ache in her bones, her hands steady on the reins, her posture no longer uncertain. The cold no longer frightened her the way it once had. It bit just the same, sharp and relentless. But she understood it now. Understood how to endure it. Beside her, Jack Turner rode in silence, his left arm bound tightly against his side, the dark stain beneath the sling evidence of a wound that had not fully healed. His face looked more worn than before, the sharp lines of his jaw more pronounced, but there was something else there now. Something resolved. Ranger followed close behind, his powerful frame cutting through the snow with unwavering loyalty, his amber eyes alert, scanning the edges of the forest as if expecting shadows to move. Deadwood appeared slowly, rising out of the white like something half-forgotten. Smoke drifted from chimneys, thin and gray, while figures moved along the streets, bundled in coats, unaware of what was about to arrive. The moment they rode in, the town changed. Conversations died. Doors creaked open. Eyes followed them. Emily felt it, the weight of every whisper, every rumor that had once defined her. But now, she did not lower her gaze. They rode straight to the sheriff's office. The building stood as it always had, solid, familiar. But something inside Emily had shifted too much for it to feel like home anymore. Jack dismounted first, his movement slower now, but no less controlled. Emily followed, her boots hitting the ground with quiet certainty. The door opened before they reached it. Deputy Thomas Reed stepped out, his expression tightening the moment he saw them. He was a younger man, perhaps in his early 30s, tall but slightly hunched, as though accustomed to yielding space to others. His sandy hair fell unevenly beneath his hat, and his clean-shaven face carried the nervous energy of someone who had lived too long under the shadow of stronger men. His eyes darted between Jack and Emily, uncertainty flickering in them. "Emily," he said, his voice hesitant. We thought that I was dead," she finished calmly. He didn't answer. Behind him, movement stirred. William Carter emerged. He looked smaller than Emily remembered, not physically, but in presence. The authority that once defined him had thinned, replaced by something fragile. His eyes widened when he saw her, relief flashing across his face, followed quickly by something else. Fear. "Emily," he breathed. She didn't move toward him. "I'm not here to come home," she said. The words struck harder than any accusation. Jack remained silent, standing slightly behind her, not as a shield this time, but as something else. Support. Deputy Reed shifted uneasily. "Sheriff, there are others you should see." As if summoned, 2 men stepped out from the office. They were Pinkerton agents, easy to recognize by the way they carried themselves. The first, Agent Harold Whitaker, was a lean man with sharp, angular features, his dark hair neatly combed despite the cold. His eyes were narrow, observant, the kind that missed nothing. His coat was immaculate, his gloves spotless. He looked like a man who believed in order, in systems, in the idea that truth could be documented and controlled. The second, Agent Samuel Briggs, was broader, older, his beard thick and streaked with gray. His posture was relaxed, but deceptive. There was weight behind it, the kind built from years of experience in places where law was more suggestion than rule. His eyes settled on Jack with recognition, not hostility. "Jack Turner," Whitaker said, his tone neutral. "You've been difficult to track." Jack didn't respond. Emily stepped forward instead. "You won't need to track him anymore," she said. Whitaker's gaze shifted to her. "Miss Carter, I presume." "You presume correctly." There was a pause, a shift in the air. Then perhaps you can explain, Whitaker continued. Why we have reports of kidnapping, murder, and—
He didn't kidnap me,
Emily cut in, her voice steady, clear enough to carry across the gathered crowd.
My father gave me away.
The silence that followed was absolute. William flinched.
Emily, no,
she said, louder now.
You don't get to speak.
Every eye in the street turned toward her. Emily felt it. The weight, the judgment. But she didn't falter. The men you're working with, she continued, looking directly at Whitaker. They're not just collecting debts. They're trafficking people. Women. Girls. Her voice tightened slightly, but she pushed through it. I was next. A ripple moved through the crowd. Whitaker's expression didn't change, but Briggs's eyes narrowed. And Jack? Whitaker asked. Emily turned slightly, just enough to glance at him. He saved me, she said. The words felt simple. Final. Whitaker studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat, pulling out a folded document. We've been reviewing old records, he said. The Hayes case. Jack's jaw tightened slightly. Whitaker unfolded the paper. There were inconsistencies. Witnesses who disappeared. Statements that don't align. Briggs stepped forward, his voice low but firm. Looks like someone needed a fall guy. Whitaker nodded once. And it appears we found one. The tension in the air shifted again. Not gone, but changed. Jack Turner was no longer just a rumor. He was something else now. Something the law could no longer ignore. William Carter staggered slightly, his composure finally breaking. You don't understand, he said desperately. I was trying to protect this town. You were protecting yourself, Emily said quietly. That hurt more. Whitaker folded the document. Sheriff Carter, we'll need you to come with us. The words fell like judgment. William looked at Emily, something pleading in his eyes. But she didn't move. Didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. As they led him away, the town watched in silence. And for the first time, Emily felt nothing. No guilt. No grief. Only clarity. She turned back to Jack. It's over, she said. He studied her for a moment, as if searching for something. And now? He asked. Emily looked around. The town. The life she had known. The version of herself that no longer existed. Then she looked at him. I don't belong here, she said. The wind stirred again, softer now, carrying the scent of snow and something new. Jack gave a small nod. That was enough. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't need to. As they rode out of Deadwood side by side, the town faded behind them once more, this time not as something lost, but as something left behind. And ahead of them, the wilderness waited, not as a threat, but as a choice. Sometimes, miracles don't come as light from the sky or voices in the wind. Sometimes, they come disguised as the very thing we fear the most. Emily thought she was being sent to her ruin. But in truth, she was being led to her salvation. And maybe that's how God works in our lives too. There are moments when everything feels wrong, when doors close, when people betray us, when we are forced into paths we never chose. We ask, why would God allow this? But what if He sees what we cannot? What if the storm is not there to destroy you, but to guide you away from something far worse? Jack was never the villain. He was the shield. And in our own lives, sometimes the hardest seasons, the coldest winters, are where God is quietly protecting us, shaping us, and leading us towards something greater. So if you're going through a difficult time right now, remember this. God has not abandoned you. He may just be working in ways you don't yet understand. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell me what part moved you the most. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your path, even through the storms you cannot yet see clearly.